Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Davine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville. And Robin Collier for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnave.com. Navé spelled N-A-V-E. I'd like to remind you we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you're interested in improving your writing chops, you can go to imaginativestorm.com, and there you'll find plenty of resources, including a free workshop my creative collaborator Allegra Houston and I do every Saturday at noon Eastern Time. It lasts an hour, and also on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Both sessions last an hour, and we generate some writing with a group of writers. It's a bit of a community gathering, if you will. imaginativestorm.com for more on that. So today I'm airing a show I recorded in 2016, and I recorded this show with my mother. She was living at the time on Pine Lane off of Brevard Road. That house is no longer there. It's been replaced by an exit ramp that goes off onto Interstate 26 and heads into Asheville. Unfortunately, the house is gone. However, it was not gone when I interviewed Mother, and she was in her room. She was in her 90s, and she left this world in 2018, so she was about 2 years away from saying goodbye to us when I spoke with her. I'm also re-airing this because my mother talks about Asheville and growing up in Asheville during the 30s, and I think since Asheville is recovering from all of the devastation from the hurricane, I think it's a good time to reflect on the history of Asheville, give you a bit of sense of what it was like when she was growing up. Nothing remarkable here, just my mother talking about her life. She does reflect on the current state of affairs with politics. She makes some comments on the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. My mother was a supporter of the Democrats. She was always a Democrat, so she's always been on that side, and she has a few comments to say, some reflections on Donald Trump, which I think will surprise you. Insightful. My mother was always very, very insightful. She taught me so much, and she and I spoke many, many, many times, year after year after year, and the conversations we had are similar to the one that you will hear right now. My mother's name was Bobbi Sue Nave. Everybody called her Bobbi Sue, and you will note that I say my name is James Navé. Actually, my family name is Nave. Years ago, somebody made a joke, said, you shouldn't be Nave, you should be Navé. I thought it was kind of fun, so I changed it. But she's Bobbie Sue Nave, and I began this conversation with her by asking her about what it was like growing up in Buncombe County. So, my friends, here's my mother, Bobbie Sue Nave. You grew up in Buncombe County.
That's correct. I've lived I wasn't born here, but I was born in South Carolina.
And you were born in what year?
1924. And the first actual memory that I have available was when I was 4 years old, and my mother and daddy were getting ready to go vote. And of course, that was a very exciting time for women to be able to go vote. And I believe Hoover was running against Al Smith, which was quite a dramatic election. Hoover was elected, though. Al Smith was Catholic. He was a New Yorker, and it created quite a stir politically. Nothing to compare with the contentious activity of the politicians at this particular time, but it had its own drama.
So when you say it created quite a stir in 1928 when you were 4 years old, what kind of stir was it?
Well, in retrospect, of course, it was just a very unacceptable candidate for the majority of the voters on the part of Al Smith.
And so when you think back to that time when you were 4 years old, where were you? Anderson, South Carolina?
No, I was already here in Buncombe County, back in the mountains.
And so you came to Asheville when you were how old?
Just an infant. I don't know how old I was.
Why did your mother and father move to Asheville?
For reasons of the economy, I imagined at the time. There was more opportunity for the work that my father did here than in South Carolina.
And what kind of work was that?
He was a salesman.
And what kind of sales?
I really don't know, because my father died when I was just 5 years of age, and now my mother was a school teacher.
And where did she start teaching school?
She graduated from Meredith College at the turn of the century, and she came to the mountains to witness and teach in Mercy, North Carolina.
You know, I remember looking through a box and finding a journal that she wrote and how she was young and happy to be in Murphy. And so your father was from Murphy, and she must have met him there, I guess.
She did. She met him after she started teaching in the local school, although that's another story.
So why wouldn't your mother get a degree? Most women didn't go to college in 1919.
Well, she had had the privilege of going to an academy before she enrolled in this school, and she, I think at that time, and perhaps it still is, affiliated with the Baptist Church, and that was just the drift of her life.
How about other people in her family? Have they been to college as well?
Well, that's another story, because her mother had died and she lived with her older sister and their family. They had a big tobacco farm down in the eastern part of the state, Wake County, I think. So her life was spent under their direction. Yes, her sister's children were educated. Her oldest son, had gone to school to be a lawyer. Other girls had been educated. So when came my mother's turn, she too was encouraged to apply herself on a level that she had access to.
So I remember when I was growing up, and we called your mother Roberta or Mimi, and she was always writing poetry and reading and getting letters from authors and corresponding with people all over the place. Is that memory right? Is that true?
That's correct, yes. I still have some of those letters from different writers. Pearl Buck, I do remember that. That was an interesting exposure to her writings. I would have to put my thinking cap on to recall the names of the other authors. I was quite blessed to have the exposure that I had from her ability to articulate and verbalize her thoughts.
So when you came to Asheville and you were growing up here, you told me a story of attending Thomas Wolfe's funeral. Do you remember that?
Definitely.
Now, back then, Asheville was not the same town as it is now. People who are listening to this broadcast maybe have moved here in the last couple of years. They see a really modern southern town, lots of vitality, lots of people walking around, often speaking different languages. You'll hear French, German, Chinese, Japanese from the people who are visiting here. Back then, it was different. So what was it like when you went to the Thomas Wolfe funeral, and what was that funeral like?
Well, perhaps I was at least maybe 10 or 12 years old at the time, and it was in the church that I was a member of, the First Presbyterian Church here in Asheville. I remember the sanctuary was filled with people. I was in the balcony with my mother. I can remember looking down when they brought the casket in, and I was just overwhelmed because Thomas Wolfe was a very substantial man. In my mind at that point in time, it was just really amazing. And a group of people, they carried the casket in and had the funeral, and I can remember them carrying the casket out to the hearse. I'm ashamed to say I don't really remember what our minister said during the service, but that was quite an experience for me. And of course, Thomas Wolfe at that point was very highly recognized in the area because of his book, Look Homeward, Angel. I'm sure a number of the people in this area today know who Thomas Wolfe was.
Well, a lot of people have visited the Thomas Wolfe house and are quite familiar with his
history and his mother and the boarding house and all the people.
And the angel is still at Riverside Park looking out over the river, I think, or at least so they say.
Well, perhaps they moved it there. But that is one section of our heritage. Many people are gone now. They don't remember that era like I do.
So what was Asheville like when you were growing up during the 20s and 30s, during the Depression? Do you remember specific things about Asheville that you really enjoyed?
As a child, well, actually, you enjoyed just your childhood within the framework of your environment, although you were very limited as far as all the stuff and things go. And you didn't have ice cream, you didn't have cookies, you didn't have all the amenities that children expect to have today because there wasn't enough to go around.
And when you were growing up in Asheville, do you remember where you grew up, what street you grew up on?
I do. Washington Road. And of course, that this point in time just seems like a different lifetime.
So as you went through your youth and were educated, and you were around your mother, who was a well-educated woman, what was your education like here in Asheville? You must have gone to...
Went to Claxton School, and it's still here. It's on the corner of Hillside and Merriman Avenue if you want to go out there and look at it.
Was it a high school?
Oh, no. I was still in the lower grades up through the 7th grade then, because education was structured a little differently. And then I did go to Lee H. Edwards. It's still very prominent part of the picture now.
Which is now Asheville High.
Yeah, it's now Asheville High.
So what was it like being in high school during that time frame? That time frame would have been in the 30s or the 40s?
Oh, no, that was the late 30s.
The late 30s. So what was it like?
Being in high school in the late 30s? Actually, everything changes, but stays the same. I honestly think I was fortunate to have the teachers that I had back in the 30s, because I can remember taking civics. I don't think they even teach civics today. And I can remember English, and I got to take typing. I was really being challenged learning to use a typewriter, and I learned to type very efficiently. I think the climate of the social interaction of the age group was probably comparable to what it is today, only back then young people were not nearly as sexually promiscuous as they are today, and they really were more easily satisfied with their lifestyle. And, of course, you didn't have cars careening all around the place. Young people were just functioning within the framework of what was available.
So when you say they were more satisfied with what they have, what would that look like?
With what they had? Well, I'm speaking of they weren't that hung up on fashions and clothes and everything. Actually, I did take home economics and learned to sew, which I thought gave me a handle on having outfits I wouldn't have had otherwise. Of course, nowadays, young people don't cook and they don't sew. They're more involved in doing other things.
So when you were in high school, do you remember the high school prom? Did you go to the prom?
I did. I don't remember it being anything too spectacular. I had to ride the bus to go.
Who did you go with? Did you have somebody take you?
I don't remember having an escort. No, it was nothing like the glorified, fantastic, awesome, overwhelming experience that it is for young people today. They're going to the beauty shop and going to find your dress and competing with who gets the most prestigious person to take them, and all that getting ready and going. It was very low-key.
You offer your take on today with a bit of irony in your voice?
Well, I think it's a whole lot to do about nothing.
Say more about that.
About the nothing part? Nothing, if you break that word down, means no thing. Was certainly not the thing back then as it is today in the 21st century.
So after you finished high school, you were headed where, and what were you up to when you graduated from high school?
Well, back then you only went through 11 grades, so I was rather young when I graduated. I was barely 17, I think. And actually my main memory of that year was the beginning of World War II, when Pearl Harbor was born and Franklin Roosevelt was president, and I have cherished memories about him because he was the first president that I knew, not personally, but I knew what was going on, and I knew the dilemma he was confronted with. But this was after Pearl Harbor, so we immediately became wrapped up in that.
So when you say you knew the dilemma that was going on, what do you mean by that?
Well, there was a lot of negative feelings about not wanting to participate in the war until it was on our doorstep.
Up until that point, the U.S. was more isolationist than anything.
I'm not equipped to give a clear picture of where we were at that point. We were trying to recover from a horrible depression, and it required a lot of blood and sweat and tears to get ready to fight.
So part of what you did during World War II was to go to nursing school, is that right?
Yes, and that's another story.
How did that happen?
I guess I was just kind of called to be a nurse.
Talk about calling. How do you know when you were called?
You know what you're going to do, and you know that you are expected to do it.
How do you know that?
The Spirit just tells you.
So when the Spirit speaks to you, do you have a different feeling than you did before the Spirit spoke?
The Spirit spoke to me when I was a child.
Talk about that.
You can't talk about something that you don't fully understand. I just know.
And how does the Spirit move you now?
The Spirit, how does it move me? Mm-hmm. It's not moving me now because it's just hovering over me, taking care of me. We're devoted children.
Speaking of devoted children and the Spirit hovering over you, would you talk a little bit about how you feel about spirit and politics in America and what that means to you?
I've had a request from a friend of Jim's who is a writer and had written a book, and I'm sure it's still available, but...
Linda Seeger.
Is that the author's name? Yes. And Linda wanted to get the response of readers to the book, and I read her book and actually wrote it as she finished up the drafts of each chapter. I think seems she would send the chapter to me and I would read it, and it was scripturally oriented. And the title of the book was Jesus Rode a Donkey.
Meaning he could have been as much of a Democrat as a Republican.
I think Jesus Christ was very ecumenical, to say the least. And that's another story, because I taught Sunday school for a number of years, so I am connected to the scriptures, and that's been a real blessing.
So when you say Christ was ecumenical, say more about what that means and how that applies to what's going on today.
Well, if you were the Almighty God and you wanted to let your little creatures know what it was all about, how would you go about doing that? That's a very provocative question.
It seems so simple.
It does, doesn't it? Well, to God, he thought, well, I can certainly speak to that. And he spoke to it in the person of Jesus Christ. You don't need to be controversial about his answer, but that's the answer.
And so how does that apply to people who might be thinking, how would that apply to me?
Well, perhaps we have become spiritually stagnant to where we are so caught up with the technology that we have become complicated with our ability to accept the simple answers.
So simplicity is lost in the complexity of our modern times.
I think the spirituality has been diluted, yes.
So one of the things I know that you've done all your life is study and read and compare everything you read to your own belief in Christ as the answer. So can you talk a little bit about some of the readings you've been most influenced by and how that connects to your faith?
That's a broad topic. I've read a lot of the convictions of people, not so much their opinions as just their personal convictions. And I've come to realize that language is the only vehicle we have to share our understanding. So I am blessed to know that I can access a level of understanding beyond my own by reading the works of not only the scriptures, but the application of the scriptures. And of course, Teilhard, as you know, is one of my points of references.
So why do you like Teilhard so much?
Because he's not so earthbound. that he can't see beyond his own limits.
So I know you also talk about mean theory.
I do. I believe that, I don't believe, but I feel that there's a lot about human nature that is conveyed from generation to generation through memetics.
How would you define memetics?
That is a very in-depth subject that needs another interview.
It's about the idea dissemination, right?
Oh, it's far more than just ideas. It's the actual evolvement of different channels. I mean, no, you can't limit it to just an idea. It's more than just an idea. It's your consciousness almost that is evolving from generation to generation and from person to person. I mean, it's just a dynamic source of evolutionary progress.
When people say they feel like they've lived at another time, do you think that it's just their sense of that is part of the idea of mean?
That I've lived in another time?
No, some people say they feel like they had a past life. And
I'm too busy with this life to find a past one. I mean, I think the past life is part of this life. Yes, I do, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And so moving from that idea to just what's going on right now, you've lived all this time. You went to nursing school. You graduated as a nurse. You worked as a nurse for how many years?
Well, all my life.
And
I mean, up until I was 70 years old.
What kind of nursing did you do?
Every kind. It wasn't, nursing back in my lifetime was not approached as it is today.
What was the difference?
Professional nurses did the hands-on care, and you were very closely identified with your patients. You didn't sit in front of a computer and look at a cardiovascular printout of what somebody's heart was doing, because you didn't have that technology back then. I mean, you learned to just walk into a patient's room and almost sense what the problem was. It was interesting.
How did you sensed it because you had so much experience?
Well, you just seemed to be on a different wavelength than you were with other responsibilities. You were so identified with the person's circumstances that you immediately could sense almost what the problem was.
So you were nursing all your life, but you were also raising a family. I was your oldest child, and you have other children, David, Sam, and Nancy. So what was that like to balance your work with being a mother and
Well,
wife?
It wasn't filled with all the drama that seems to be bothering everybody today. I just worked it out. My husband was certainly a very supportive person as far as taking over. When I had my family, I worked a different shift, of course, mainly the afternoon shift from 3 to 11 o'clock, and I'd do all my housework before I went to work. And then when their daddy came home, he took care of the children. And then, as I say, I don't remember that part of my life experience as being so traumatic in that respect.
Right.
But I realize that things are different today. And we could go on and talk some more. Oh, goodness gracious, you can't imagine. Then when you have grandchildren, you're responsible for them. I raised one And I don't like the term raised. The old folks called it raising children. Children are not raised nowadays, they're programmed. But
So what's the best way to bring children up as a parent?
What is the best way to bring children up as a parent?
Yeah, how do you parent a child in a really creative way?
I wouldn't want to be a parent in this day and age because I would be perfectly frantic.
How come?
Because everything is so reconnected. I mean, you don't have, even your family structure is different today. I really don't know what people do with their children today. They try to just accommodate them the best they can.
Well, some seem to do better than others.
Well, if you say so, I think they forfeit a lot of joy of parenthood by trying to provide so many advantages and so much stuff and buy all their clothes. And I don't ever remember my children needing all the clothes they need today.
Well, I remember when I was growing up and you were going off to work, and our father, some people called him JC, he was here taking care of us. He played the fiddle and when you were gone. But I remember we would go to Meadows' store on Haywood Road every late August, and Mrs. Meadows was there and she would greet us, and every season we would sit down and she would take the shoes out and we would be one size bigger than we were the year before, and we'd get a new pair of shoes, and then she would sell a few pair of jeans. I think I got a couple of new pair of jeans, and I remember those jeans, you would wash the jeans and starch them and hang them on the line with a stretcher.
Yeah.
So that when I put my jeans on to go to school, I had these crisp, clear, clean jeans that carried me off to school, and I could look like I was well kept. And even to this day, I'll still iron my jeans. I honestly,
That's true. I'm sure you. Well, that's just part of the mimetic ability of memes to energize the next generation. I mean by that, different. Yeah, I think too, and that you see this. I think you see this from generation to generation. Now, I don't know what this generation will reflect.
well, it's hard to say. I
have no idea, but I'm sure that it'll seem natural to them.
Well, all elders worry about the upcoming generation, and that never seems to change.
But one other comment about me stretching your jeans. Now, with one of the grandchildren that I had the pleasure of being responsible for, played football. He played football. Every Friday he'd come home with his practice football clothes. They were just covered in mud. Well, I couldn't see just rinsing the mud out. I had to scrub his practice pants, and everybody talked about how come John wore such clean pants to practice football in. But he had them the whole time he was in high school. He had clean practice pants.
Well, I remember when I was in high school, I would iron all my shirts as well. So not only did I have iron pants, but I had iron shirts as well. And I imagine that all came from going to Miss Meadows' store and getting jeans, and then starch and stretchers and sun and clothesline.
Well, yeah, and I always loved to iron, I guess. Ironing was a big part of my introduction to being a real housewife.
A real housewife. as opposed to a fake housewife.
Or as opposed to one that didn't enjoy doing the housewifely things.
Well, I still enjoy cleaning. Even to
I love, and I don't like vacuum cleaners. I'd rather sweep anytime.
I'm partial to vacuum cleaners. I like a decent vacuum.
They make too much noise.
Well, I guess everybody has their own preference with vacuum cleaners. So in terms of, one of the things I also remember, in speaking of ironing shirts, we would go to church every Sunday. And I remember I would always be so happy to have my ironed shirt and put my tie on. And I remember I learned how to play a tie, a Windsor knot.
Oh, yeah, that.
Go off to church.
Had to. Well, there is comfort in consistency. As a parent, though, I was consistently inconsistent. So my children grew up pretty independent.
Was that something you chose to do, or was that I remember always being free to go do whatever I pleased.
I just couldn't be too overbearing. I wasn't natured that way.
I don't remember too many rules when we grew up. I don't remember being too wild, but and that's a memory that I've.
Only thing I really taught you to do is wash your hands before you could eat.
Oh, well, that's still true.
I do remember that. I remember all the dogs the children had. That's strange how animals have a connection with a nuclear family, and they become almost integrated into the pattern of the rhythm that each family has.
So some of the dogs, what were the dogs' names? Do you remember some of the dogs?
We had, the first dog we had was the feller dog.
And I remember one named Chumpy.
Oh, we had one named Chumpy. And then we had, I think that was a dog took care of you when you were little. As you grew up, he was your protector. And then we had Bear, of course.
Right.
For a long time, we had Bear.
And then we have Teeny and Tiny.
Oh, they were we had the little terrier, what are they called?
Dachshunds or
No.
Chihuahuas?
No. I've got a mental block about them. You know what they are called? The little terriers that, it'll come to me. My brain's coming a little deactivated.
And Traveler came around?
Oh, that was your dog. Yeah, I kept Traveler a long time. For a while when he got too old for you to keep him with you.
And so now, aside from all these dogs,
Jack Russells.
Jack Russell. That's
the two little Jack Russells that we had. That's another thing, though. My children are all very well educated. It wasn't any great big deal about it. You just went on. Sam went to school. You went to school, but then you didn't finish your school till after the Vietnam War. And then David Nave, he went in the Air Force. When he came out, he went to tech school, which was fortunate because he had a very good paying job for 40 years. And Nancy's very well educated.
We're all smart and educated.
Yes, she went to Western. Well, we were fortunate that you had access to the schools that are available now to the young people. I don't know what it is about this finishing up your education that's such a challenge for people.
I don't know either.
I just don't understand it. It's so unnecessary.
And you went back to college when you were in your 50s, right?
Oh, yeah. But I did that because I love to go to school. I don't know that I really needed to go, but I wanted to get a Bachelor of Science in the healthcare field, even though I really felt fairly competent in the jobs that I had. I never had any problem getting employment.
That's because you were a 3-year nurse graduate.
Yeah, I had I was a registered nurse with a broad background, and of course training in Biltmore Hospital. The Vanderbilts built that hospital when they built the Biltmore House in the village and everything. And
so you went to college in your 50s, but I remember you reading all along the way. Like, who are some of the people that you love to read? Your favorite authors?
I would have to really put my thinking cap on. Oh, I always enjoyed, well, I don't know. I don't remember too much fiction, but I've read a good bit of fiction, but so much of the fiction is repetitive. I mean, you kind of know what the plot's going to be and how it's going to work out because we don't want to read tragedies. I do not like murder stories or mystery stories. I don't have the patience to do that. I always loved to read Robert Hughes. He's dead now. He wrote those fatal sores about Australia. Oh, which people should. That gives you a lot of background to build on their experiences, which is the best teacher, of course. But you build on other people's experiences as well.
Well, I remember when I was growing up, I loved to read the comic books. I would read the classic illustrated comic books.
That's why you always enjoyed reading. I'm not adverse to reading anything. I'm like that person who was traveling and in the hotel room. She couldn't, I guess maybe would have had a copy of the Bible, but she was looking for something to read because she, for some reason, didn't, and she found a box of soda. So she just read all the information on this box of soda. It's amazing at what you can pick up and provoke your mind with when you really are receptive to the written word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. That's from the scripture, of course.
And I remember when I was a boy, you would always quote Ulysses to me.
Oh, yes. I always liked the poems. I've got copies of poems that I really read and reread. And right now I'm going to reread Rudyard Kipling's L'Envoi. When Earth's last picture is painted and the tubes are twisted and dried, that's my body right now, it's twisted and dried. When the oldest colors have faded, see my white hair? And the youngest critic has died, we shall rest. In faith we shall need it, lie down for an eon or two. Eon's a long time. 2 of them's even longer. Till the master of all good workmen shall put us to work anew. And those that were good, this is Kipling talking now, he's just having his Jungle Book thrown in people's faces with all the technology involved. All those animals they've made with the 3D printers, which one of my grandchildren do.
I think the Jungle Book is now coming out right now, right?
It is.
Yes.
Yes.
Right today, 2016.
one of the grandchildren said he didn't want his child to see it because it was kind of violent.
Oh. So Kipling wrote the Jungle Book and continue with Kipling's poem. Continue with the
But the
poem.
master of all good workmen is going to put us to work anew. And those that were good shall be happy. They shall sit in a golden chair. They shall splash at 10-league canvases with brushes of comet's hair. They shall find real saints to draw from, Magdalene, Peter, and Paul. They shall work for an age at a sitting and never be tired. Not at all. And this, I especially like the end of the poem. And only the master shall praise us, and only the master shall blame, and no one shall work for money, and no one shall work for fame, but each for the joy of the working, and each in his separate star shall draw the thing as he sees it, for the God of things as they are. I didn't remember that being God. I thought it was good. And I said, for the good of things as they are. But God is good. And the other very provocative thing that has really stimulated my mind, and I don't know, it just came in out of the ether ways. I don't speak foreign languages. A lot of people do, which is fine. I heard where the Arabic, and I've told you this, translation for mercy means being merciful, which encompasses a wide sphere of comfort. They translate merciful to mean womb, W-O-M-B, a womb. And what grows in a womb?
The child grows in a womb.
Yeah. So it also, in my mind, means unconditional love. I think that's very comforting. Actually, so much of your scriptures were written from the Aramaic language. I guess we know that.
I wanted you just to talk a little bit more before you go about like how you feel about the politics right now.
I think everybody's suffering from Trumpitis.
Say just a little bit more about that.
If you've ever had arthritis or neuritis or endocarditis, which is fatal, any kind of itis, tonsillitis. Of course, children don't have tonsillitis nowadays because they got all these antibiotics, but we don't have any antibiotic for Trumpitis.
So what are we going to do?
So what are we going to do? You tell me. I'm depending on you to tell me. I'm talking to the voters.
So you're saying to the voters, let's cure Trumpitis.
Yes, let's get past the itis and find a remedy for all this disruption and unbalance. There's only one direction that you can go in. You may have to take some detours, but I don't want to take an itis detour. It's too uncomfortable.
So you think Trump Trump himself is a reflection of that itis that is Trumpitis?
That's correct. And actually, he's justified if he is with the observations that he's throwing out there, but the road to hell's paved with good intentions. And there's a difference in intentions and then acting on your... Actually, when you start acting on your intentions, you better be sure what direction you're going in. But there's a lot of people in this country who feel that they've been betrayed.
Do you feel you've been betrayed?
No, because I'm not on that that route. I think I'm extremely blessed for some reason, not because anybody deserves anything, but just because God loves Trump as much as he does me, but he loves me too. So I'm sure he'll straighten Trump out.
So you're saying just leave it to the divine.
Definitely. Heavens, yes.
Well, I think that's a good place to close on.
Oh, thank God.
So just thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And
Well, that's not very comprehensive, honey. That's just a little drip in the bucket. And you're one of the biggest drips I have.
say thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, me. No, it's been fun.
And so there you go, my friends. My mother, Bobbi Sue Nave, talking about growing up in Western North Carolina and reflecting on religion, politics, and just what it's like to be alive in the world in 2016. Like I said, she's no longer with us. I recall when she did pass, she was in hospice, and she'd had some problems in the hospital, and those problems caused her final days. And I was there as we had this transition time. And I remember the day she died, I knew it was happening, and I sat by her bed, and I recited Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And she mentioned that, I think, in the interview, and Ulysses said, "For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset in the baths of all the western stars until I died." And she would always say to me when I was a boy, "You are a part of all that you have met, yet all experience is an arch, where through gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever as you move." So I sat there beside her bed on the last day she was on earth and told her how much I cared for her, how much I appreciated all she had said to me over the years, how much she had taught me, and how much I took it all in and was beginning to understand it. And she couldn't speak. She could listen, though, and I know she was listening. And I said, "I'm going to just give you this poem back so you know that I will take all this very seriously as I go forward in my life." And I said the poem to her, and it was so significant to me, so significant. So as I'm thinking now about her, I keep thinking she'll come back and whisper something to me, but she hasn't done that yet. No whispering from my mother. When she died, passed on, she was gone. She had somewhere else to get to. I don't know where it was, but the room was empty. All that was there was her body, and the rest gone. I know she went somewhere. She always said she was looking forward to that moment, and I can only trust that it was a meaningful, significant transition for her as she went on her merry way. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dio, for managing WPVM-FM, and Robin Collier for doing the same in Taos, KCEI Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. You can always reach me, Navé at jamesnave.com, and we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. So now to close us out, I would like to offer you Carolina in the Morning, sung by Big John Scherer. Big John's a friend of mine. I've aired this song before. It's one of my favorites. It's titled Carolina in the Morning, and it opens with the line, "Nothing could be finer than to be in Carolina in the morning." And I used to listen to that on WWNC 57.0 AM when I was growing up. And my mother would cook breakfast, and we would hear in the background that song. And so it has a great deal of meaning for me. And also, as Asheville in Western North Carolina is recovering, I hope it has a little bit of meaning for those of you listening in the Asheville area. It reminds us of where we come from and reminds us of where we're going. And even sometimes when beauty seems to be a bit out of reach, this song is a beautiful rendition of what it's like to wake up in Western North Carolina on a summer morning. Here's Big John Scherer. Hope you enjoy it.
Nothing could be finer than to be in Carolina in the morning. Nothing could be sweeter than my sweetie when I meet her at dawning. See the morning glory twine around the door, whispering pretty stories I long to hear once more. Strolling with my girlie when the dew is pearly early in the morning. Butterflies all flutter up and kiss each little buttercup at dawn. If I had Aladdin's lamp only a day, I'd make a wish, and here's what I'd pray. Nothing could be finer than to be in Carolina in the